So this talk was actually, this title was not designed by me. It was someone within the team who came up with the title, Transformation from Within, knowing me and knowing, I suppose, knowing the topics that I'm deeply passionate about. And I think that one of the things that has happened over the last decade specifically is the rise in exponential technologies and how our attention tends to be pulled in multiple directions. And sometimes there can be so many shiny objects to look at. Just in this specific cohort, there was so much knowledge that you had to grab, be centered, to try and absorb, figure out the parts that really you were deeply curious about. And just in that space of gaining knowledge in this community, you need to find this way of centering yourself so you can figure out what you really gravitate towards. And so I think this conversation is very fitting for this time that we're finding ourselves in history. It's a very significant time in history. And the reason I say that is not surprising, right? Like, why is this an important conversation? Why should we talk about what's going on within ourselves right now? And quite honestly, the world has been gripped by fear for the longest time, especially when it came to the way economic models were set up. They were set up with good intention, I believe. I believe when evolution takes place, humanity's thinking about ways to improve. And then if it's not observed and if it's not taken care of and nurtured, there are always going to be things that give. And so right now, we find ourselves in narratives that are fear-led versus love-led, leading with love. And I think one of the technologies that can really shift us into this sense of collaboration, into the sense of really being there and creating an economy together is blockchain technology, being one of the foundational technologies that can shift this. I believe we're still in a phase where people are discovering what this is all about. There's so much to talk about. There's a lot of jargon. And I think the master's program significantly has done an amazing job on simplifying it so that you can digest, what this technology could do for us. But on the larger scale, what we're seeing is a massive shift. There are systems that are falling apart or unraveling because of the need for evolution. They don't fit what our value systems as a collective are anymore. There's this need for deeper freedom, this need for a sense of purpose, this need for meaning. You can't necessarily fit a new way of thinking using an old paradigm. And so the shift leads us to think about what I believe is the first takeaway that I'd like to leave with you, is that even though we're at this time where things seem exciting as well as a little daunting with what's going on in the world, we're living in the most extraordinary time in human history. But we need to exercise the sense of self-awareness and self-determination to be able to steer and navigate all the changes that are taking place around us. And so let's just zoom out a little bit for a moment, right? Let's take a snapshot view on what's going on around us. Well, we've got politics that is grabbing our attention. We turn on the news and there's a lot going on. I mean, with Russia and Ukraine, the Great Reset and everything that's happening in regard to people leaving organizations because they don't necessarily agree with the rules being put on them, the mandates by governments being overthrown because people don't want to play by those stories. And then this confusion that has taken place over the last 2 plus years with COVID, what to do, what's the right thing to do? How do I live in a world like this? I think there's a breathing within the collective now where people are stepping out of that, but it has caused this deeper sense of awareness on a collective level that we need to focus on fundamentals within ourselves to get through these very difficult times. And I'll get into more of that further down the presentation. Then we look at economics. And I mean, this is why you're part of this cohort, to understand what's happening with the future of money. And I think it's a very exciting time. I think there's a lot of amazing things that we can do in regard to upgrading our concept of wealth, which I believe will play a knock-on effect on upgrading our concept of well-being, because they do go hand in hand. When it comes to wealth and it comes to money, it's a form of exchange. It's a form of exchanging value between two people or between two entities. And if the intentions or if the purpose isn't necessarily serving the collective for the betterment, well, then it's going to definitely have a knock-on effect on well-being, either immediately or in the long term. And so I really like how this next video clip that I'm going to play for you was narrated by Stuart Wallace, who's of the New Economic Foundation. He kind of succinctly puts what we need to look at in regard to moving the economic models forward and how that ties into well-being. So I'm just going to play that for you right now.
We need a different economic model. And by that, I don't mean capitalism versus communism. What I'm talking about is a shift in the system along the lines of the two big changes that happened in the 20th century, Keynesianism, with a much greater focus on health and education and the role of government working with business, and then a reaction against that in late century to neoliberalism, where the focus was on free markets, freedom of the individual, and getting governments out of the way. We need a shift to a new system that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, that will live within planetary means, that will be fairer, and that will be focused as its key goal, not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being. And history tells us that a values shift is triggered by creation of a new story about how we want to live.
And so what that kind of says, which is the second takeaway I want to leave you with, is there needs to be a change in economic models. And this is what you have been discussing over the past 6 weeks. I know some of you have been in more than one master's cohort, and the conversations are so beautiful because there are people that really restore the sense of faith in humanity, that we're going to change the world for the better. At least we're going to try. And he talks about, more importantly, there needs to be this shift in consciousness. And consciousness is a big word. It's hard to kind of understand it. And I like to just say consciousness can be replaced by the word awareness. So what is this deeper sense of awareness and how can we get there? Well, I think it's not necessarily this concept of, an economic model that drives growth per se, but it's really the deeper rooted foundation of what I believe we can do here at UNIT and what we can do here with people who are driven for impactful change is on maximizing human well-being. They really go hand in hand. The other thing that we've seen completely take us by storm is technology, right? Like from everything to do with the crypto revolution, that's why you're here, to gain an understanding of what's going on, to the metaverse and to robotics and to AI. And, Elon Musk, put out that announcement saying a round trip ticket to Mars would cost us 100,000. And by the next couple of years, like he's working towards that, right? All of these things, this exponential movement within the technology industry and by large has taken us all into this space where we're thinking, what is really going to happen to the way we live today? And if you've got kids, you're thinking about, well, how is it going to affect their lives? And so this is all very exciting. But how do we adapt to it as an individual? So thinking about our sovereignty in everything that's going on around us, how can we use technology to benefit us as individuals, but then also live wholesomely in the collective to affect the collective in a positive way? And so one of the initial people who had seen this spike in the technology era was Gordon Moore, who was the co-founder and chairman of Intel. Some of you must be quite aware. And in 1965, he said, well, integrated circuits and computers were going to, the number of transistors on that circuit were going to double every 24 months. And what that really meant was that the processing power of computers were going to start, exponentially increasing over time. And that was a pivotal moment in history, because he had kind of envisioned what was going to come, but we really couldn't see it. You know, when someone comes up with a new theory, we think, oh, really, is that going to happen? And lo and behold, we're now talking about quantum computing. And this is Sundar Pichai, as most of you know, who's the CEO of Alphabet and Google, right, as its subsidiary. And this is Sycamore. Sycamore is the quantum computer, and that they've been putting together, and they launched an announcement in 2019 to say that they had reached quantum supremacy, which was then counter-argued by IBM and China. And there's now this competition across countries on which country and which corporation is going to claim quantum supremacy. Quantum supremacy just means that there will be computing power that's going to be beyond our mind, right? So for example, the Sycamore was able to perform a calculation in 200 seconds that would take the most powerful computer right now 10,000 years to perform. So now if you think about that, that in itself is an exponential technology. Now, when I think about it, there's great power in these technologies. How are we going to, as individuals, live in a world that is powered by such powerful technologies if we don't have this innate sense of awareness on where we're going to be putting our efforts and time, and how we're going to use technology for our advantage versus be subject to the way it maneuvers our lives, right? So use it for good rather than be hacked by it. And I'll get into that. I really liked that phrase that was actually coined by Yuval Harari. And he had this talk with Tristan Harris, and he talked about how, you know, we're living at this time where we're being hacked in this attention economy. But we can turn that around if we are more aware of what technology can be used for to better our lives. We can just shift it. But it's just this deeper sense of awareness. It's this deeper sense of consciousness. And so, you know, as people compete for quantum supremacy, exponential technology has kind of shot through the roof. And over here, you can see this graph. I'm pretty sure some people on this call, I can see some familiar faces. Know Peter Diamandis, and he talks about this a lot, in Salim Ismail, where they talk about how, you know, in the early times, things would grow at a linear rate, and then suddenly, over the last 50 years, things have just shot up as soon as we started to digitize things, digitize services, digitize actions. And now we're kind of living in an era of Web 3.0, where we know value can be exchanged in a completely new revolutionary way. And so as we move into these new spaces, I want us to think a little bit about the linear versus exponential, because it's an important concept to grasp, and also think about how that could affect our lives. So, you know, when you think about linear, you think 30 linear steps. If one step is a meter, you're going to get 30 meters, right? But now if you think about 30 exponential steps, that's like 20 times. You could go, if you're taking 30 exponential steps as a human being, you go 26 times around the globe. And that's quite crazy to wrap your head around. That's how fast technology is accelerating. And I think we as humans have created it. You know, there's this whole thing about, there's a lot of conversations about how technology is growing at a rate where it's actually going to surpass our own capabilities, to the point where it could be detrimental to us, right? Like this dystopia image. And I always question this notion that we were the ones who created it, right? Like we are the ones who've created this technology. We used our imagination to bring these beautiful technologies into life. And so we also have the power and the responsibility to steer in which direction these technologies get used, and whether they get used for the collective betterment or not. And so the development of the next 200 years will top those of the last 2000, as Ray Kurzweil said. And Ray Kurzweil is the CTO of Google. You know, he's at the forefront of this, and we know that these are the data hubs We don't want that anymore. That's why we're part of communities like this. We don't want people to own our data. So what are we going to do to change that, right? And then there's the planetary and intraplanetary shifts that are happening in the world. You know, there's a lot of movements that talk about seed sovereignty, like who owns the rights to the production of food. I mean, these are great conversations, and there's great projects that have spun from these conversations in the blockchain community. And some of our speakers have actually tapped into this, right? So what can we do in regard to climate change, in regard to food supply, in regard to, you know, taking off to Mars? Like, what does it mean for the collective to experience those things, and for everyone to have a fair and equal opportunity, right? And then we go into more of the human implications of what is happening around us, the well-being aspect. We know that COVID, you know, led to a spike in suicide cases all around the globe. It was horrendous. There have been so many reports that I've read around the depletion of mental health and the increased supply of antidepressants to communities, which is really disheartening. It's really sad. And when you think about situations that take place in humanity that spin us off emotionally, we have to think about what are the changes that we need to make to better equip human beings to be anti-fragile, to find ways to manage themselves in these times that could arise again. And, you know, there could be other things that spin around the corner. So how are we going to help each other as a collective? And then from that stems this need for a deeper sense of meaning. And this is why, you know, this presentation this is one of the core topics of this presentation is, you know, how do we transform within ourselves to find meaning in the world, to find meaning within ourselves, and find and discover where we want to apply our energy, apply our effort, and better the world. And so the next video that I'm going to play is by someone who I deeply love, and I know that you would probably know this gentleman, Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan is someone I often turn to for inspiration, to remind myself that, you know, I'm a tiny little human being living on this tiny little planet that's actually part of a multiverse. And every time I think of that, I think, you know, we've been living in a world where people often hold on to things around them. There's a sense of attachment instead of this need for being present and just living fully in the moment. And I often turn to this video to remind myself that, you know, we're really living on a speck of dust in this universe, and we've only got a limited time to make meaning and to do something worthwhile. So I'm going to share this little snippet of a video, and
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different.
there you have it, Carl Sagan. I'm sure a lot of you know him. I think that if we can appreciate the beautiful technologies that we're building, most powerful technologies that we're building, and use them for good, we can actually do so much to better our planet, to help the collective, and to create projects, ideas, and solutions that are going to help us all live better. And so now, from that vantage point of us being on this tiny speck of dust in a multiverse, let's zoom in a little bit. All right. Now let's think about how much do we know about what's going on with ourselves? Like, what is going on within us? And how do we navigate the things we feel, our emotions, the things that talk to us on a daily basis? Do we know how to move with them and find our way in every moment? And I think it's such a beautiful practice to get better acquainted with ourselves in each passing moment and find compassion as we move through it. And of course, also to find this strength and conviction and fierce love to do the things that really matter to our heart. There's this really amazing conversation and that I watched, and I'll share the link in the group chat between Yuval Hariri and Tristan Harris. And I'm sure some of you know Tristan Harris from The Social Dilemma. I'm pretty sure this community is well aware. And I really like this thought that he shared about attention being sacred. And the fact that we're being pulled in multiple directions, if we can figure out where we want to place our energy, that's actually going to shift our well-being for the better. So takeaway 3 is we're living in a time where humans are subject to being hacked by the big tech companies, right? That own our data, that feed us content because they know us through their algorithms, right? Having this awareness, we can now make choices on whether we want to actually be a part of that or not. And I think that in itself is an awareness of how we can step out and start to build technologies that take us away from that. And this is one of the things in the blockchain community. This is what we want, to create the sense of independence from controlling bodies, right? To have that choice. And so we know that we could be hacked unless we make a choice not to. And paradoxically, it is also a time where we can truly claim our true sovereignty if we courageously choose to do this inner work. So the question to ask ourselves is, am I aware of my reason for being? Why am I here? What do I want to contribute to? And what really drives my curiosity? Places I want to play, the people that matter in my life, the things that matter to me, the things that bring me joy, so I can show up as a more whole human within this collective. And so there's this quote by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he says, where attention goes, energy flows. So the question really is, where is your energy flowing? And I think it's a question that I've come to ask myself every single day. And the more I've gotten to practice this on a daily basis, I actually channel my efforts towards things that matter to my heart. And I end up more fulfilled and satisfied towards the end of the day. There are people I coach on purpose to help discover purpose. And I almost feel like we're not here to discover purpose. I feel like we're almost remembering it. There's a phase in our life that we go through as a child and we grow into an adult, and we're gaining the tools and the skill sets of how to be and navigate in this world. It's so needed. You meet people who challenge you and scare you, and you kind of learn these lessons the hard way of how to be in the world. And then you get into exciting projects that kind of get you super excited, but you're not necessarily feeling that that's going to be something that you focus on for the rest of your life. But you start to learn more about yourself. You start to learn more about how to be in this collective. And it's a beautiful process. We gain this sense of presence, that we gain the sense of knowingness of how to navigate as humans. And we may not like all the experiences that show up in our lives, but then there comes this point where we ask ourselves, well, what am I doing with my life? Like, what do I really want to contribute to the greater good? And I think it's at that point when those moments come in our life, and there can be multiple cycles in our lifetime, we have this power of deeper self-awareness. And this power of deeper self-awareness has a knock-on effect on the collective. So think of yourself as a beautiful, profound, exponential technology. If we can think of ourselves as individuals and think of the instruments that lie within us, our minds, the most powerful thing within our body, our hearts, right, our body, like this is a technology in itself. How are we optimizing our human technology? And so we start with the concept of brain intelligence, right? Like when we think about intelligence, and there's so much conversation around collective intelligence and what we can do together in communities that are driven around one purpose. And there's this concept of mind over matter. If we believe it, we can materialize it, right? Like the amazing projects in various blockchain communities, like some of the things that are coming out are just profound. I know Yip was at Denver and she pitched on stage, and I thought her and the team at Denver came up with an amazing idea of meditate to earn, right? Like motivating people to step into their awareness for a moment and actually play with it and say, hey, could you possibly use blockchain technology to encourage people to do things that can help them evolve in consciousness? And so, there was a profound piece of information that shifted the way I understood habit forming, and I understood the way I showed up in the world. So I want to ask everyone on this call, if you were to right now tell me, ballpark figure, how much of your mind right now in this present situation, being on this call, listening to this talk, is conscious, is aware, what percentage would you put on it? How conscious do you think, how much of your conscious mind do you think is running right now? Give it a go. Any guesses? %, 40%, okay, 30. Super. 1%. Ooh, Mac. All right. So yeah, Mac and Olga are actually quite accurate. I was, when I first found this out, right, I was blown away. Less than 5% of our mind is actually conscious in this moment, which means we operate on a subconscious level for about 90% of our mind is running on subconscious. And when I think about that, I think, oh my goodness, we are looping in patterns unless we actually reflect and think about the things we do in our day and why we're doing them. We're on these loops, and these loops are created from patterns we formed all the way from when we were, a baby up until now. In fact, from the age of 0 to 7, we absorb information like sponges. And so a lot of the patterns from our childhood are deeply rooted within us. Of course, everything through a process can be unlearned and learned anew. And that's the beauty of the human mind. But this piece of information is deeply profound and can shift the way we look at ourselves. For me to realize that only 5% of me or 3% or 1% is actually conscious in this moment, I know that I can do a lot to improve myself and tap into those subconscious patterns that probably aren't serving me. So are you creating from a place of pre-existing notions in your awake state right now, everyone on the call, or are you creating from this field or this sense of new possibilities, right? And so when I think about brain intelligence, I really like this chart that I'm going to share with you. It helped me understand it on a scientific level, right? And so right now, everyone on this call is awake, and you're listening, hopefully, if you're not distracted, right? And even if you're distracted, you're in beta mode. And what mode means is that you're active and you're engaged with some stimulus in your environment. This could also mean that you're stressed or anxious, but there are good states of beta brainwaves where you're engaged in an activity that you're excited about. Like I'm giving this talk right now, and I'm really happy to share this information because it's information that gets me excited. So the beta brain waves say that you're in the state of awakeness, right? And then you get into the state of alpha brain waves. So when you take that deep breath, the reason why it's good to return to stillness and return to the breath is because the breath can take you from those heightened states of stress and anxiety, or even if you're excited and you just want to like nudge yourself down a bit, take a deep breath, it brings you into this state of alpha brain waves. And alpha brain waves, you're more, you can make better decisions, you're more physically relaxed and in your body, and you're more grounded in the present moment. If you continue taking those deep breaths and bring your brainwave state further down, you get into the theta state. And the theta state is when you can tap into more creativity, you can gain more clarity because your brain's not processing multiple stimulus at the same time. It's now in this state of receivership. It's now in the state of, okay, what comes to me from an intuitive standpoint, I'm open to. And this is why typically people, especially artists, tend to take these breaks during their time of creating art to kind of get into nature, and artists can be even technologists, right? We're all creative beings. So you do a stretch of work and then you get away and you want to ground yourself, or you want to get into a creative space, you would go into a more relaxing environment so that your brain is now back into this space of creating, and creating from a sense of newness. Delta is when you're now getting into that phase where you're off to sleep, right? Like you're switched off, you're not in the conscious world, you're in dreamland, right? And I think it's important to know this because just by having this basic knowledge, and I'm pretty sure some of you on this call already know this, you can really start to use the breath to ground yourself in the present moment and to even tap into deeper creativity and be able to reset yourself when you're feeling this sense of anxiety and stress. So these are basic techniques to transform yourself in a present moment from within. And it's a little hack to bring you back into an equilibrium within yourself. And so the one thing we don't want, we don't want an increased level of cortisol in our blood that's unhealthy. Good levels of adrenaline and cortisol, which, as you've heard through multiple self-help channels, they talk about these being the hormones that boost your excitement, right? Cortisol levels, if it becomes chronic and it's sustained over a period of time, causes disease. Increased cortisol leads to disease. And so the one thing we need to be aware of is, if we're feeling that level of anxiety, well, how do we now start to create an environment within ourselves so that our human technology can work in its best, most optimal state? Well, take a breath to start with. Take a deep breath, take a couple of deep breaths, right? I think this concept of stillness in a world that is deeply chaotic and can pull us in multiple directions can help bring us back into a purpose and bring us back into the moment. And so you can tap into a deeper sense of creativity and intuition in these alpha states and even beyond that, but we're not going to get into that over here. The second is the heart intelligence, and this concept of follow your heart. And there have been so many jokes made about that, like follow your heart but take your mind with you, and I totally agree. The one thing about the heart that's been spoken about in so many stories, even from back in the day, our grandparents and our ancestors have passed down stories that talk about what it means to truly follow your passion and follow your heart. And I always wondered from a scientific perspective, because for me, I always kind of tied it back into science, and I wanted to understand it from a more left-brained perspective. And actually trying to get answers in that space pulled me into doing research in what was heart intelligence, what it meant to have our hearts really be healthy more moments of the day. And so when I talk about a heart being healthy, I'm talking about really feeling into our heart and understanding that our heart is the center. I mean, the minute our heart goes off, boom, time out on planet Earth, right? And so when I think about the heart, I think about it as having this authority over every other part of our body. It's almost like the thing that supplies life to the rest of us, yet we take it for granted and oftentimes we shun it aside. And I got into research of what it really meant to tap into heart coherence. And when I talk about heart coherence, I'm talking about a heart that is healthy and it has heartbeats that are healthy and creating this rhythm or this signaling to the brain that's telling the brain, hey, we're actually doing fine. The body is safe. I can now create. I don't need to worry. I don't need to have this anxiety. I'm all right. And as I got into that research, there was really something beautiful that I discovered. I discovered that the heart actually emits an electromagnetic field. And if anyone has heard of the Heart Math Institute, I kind of dug into their research and I tried to understand what this really meant, right? Like, was it woo-woo, or what was the research behind this? And they've actually been doing this for decades, 3 decades in total, where they've been calculating and measuring the electromagnetic fields that actually stem from our heart. And that actually changes depending on what we're feeling in the moment. So almost like a mobile phone, right? Like that transmits information and we exchange messages. Well, when we're sitting in a space of fear, we've got a smaller field that goes around us. But when we're sitting in a space of love, this field, like a torus field, it literally spans us across about 3 feet out of our body. And with just knowing that, I thought, my goodness, we in ourselves have an innate human technology that can communicate with other human beings on whether we are sitting in a place of fear or sitting in a place of love. And I feel like meditation or stillness or breath work or whatever you'd like to call it helps root us back into our heart space and create these bigger fields of expansiveness so we can be these creative, beautiful beings that we're meant to be. I mean, the health of the heart has so many other factors that come into play. One of the things, obviously, is if you're feeling the sense of expansiveness in your heart, you just have more positive emotions. You're able to even navigate when you're having these stressful emotions. You're okay to accept them and move through them rather than push them aside. So just being in the heart gives us more compassion for ourselves. But then also being able to understand our hearts can help us create a healthier environment within our bodies, which I think is beautiful. And so I got into doing a little bit of research with a group of people for the span of a year. And we sat in, tracking biofeedback. And what we ended up finding is when people actually sat down and practiced stillness, where they take their awareness from their mind into their heart and just breathe for 5 minutes in a day, it actually dropped their levels of cortisol, which was stress, right? Because now you're more relaxed and you're creating this environment within yourself that's actually optimal for you to be creative. And your patterns change. So you can see over here, the heart rhythm patterns of incoherence are highly fluctuating. And this actually causes this sense of anxiety, and which ultimately stems into different diseases. There's a ton of research that's written on how chronic cortisol is actually the fundamental reason for a majority of chronic diseases in the world. And then if you sit in the sense of in the space of coherence, you're generating feelings of confidence, appreciation, love, and courage. And here's what the great takeaway was, is that we can actually create those feelings on demand. We do not necessarily need to wait for an external stimulus to be sitting in better feeling spaces. If we find this way of maneuvering our heart space, we would be able to navigate very difficult situations, because now we have this awareness that there's a technology within us that we can actually play with to help us and benefit our bodies. So to find your way, get into your heart. And, there's this saying, the brain thinks, but the heart knows. And sometimes using your heart as a guiding compass in life can help serve the mind to do the work it's meant to do and help us actually action what we need to action in the world. So takeaway 4 is your heart is your compass, and it's a well-being amplifier, right? It can help you tap into those deeper states of creativity. It can help get your body into equilibrium. And your mind serves as your assistant to help you process and take action. You need your heart. You need your heart to fuel your mind. And one of the amazing things that I found out, which I had no idea, was that the heart sends 10 times more signals to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. Mind blowing, for me, it was always the mind. And here I discovered a new truth, which was that we actually power the brain from the heart, which kind of makes sense for looking at the concept as though, well, can our heart guide us in the direction we're supposed to go, help us find our purpose and be this well-being amplifier? And then we use our minds to live in the world and take action. And your body just does the work. You keep your body, fit so it can be present, and take care of your energy or your zest so you can catalyze all of this and really be present in the world. So the breath being one of the basic takeaways for understanding, the transformation space, where the transformation really starts is just for us to be able to sit with ourselves, And there was this research done where they took a group of people and they put them in the room, and they'd never ever sat in stillness, highly ambitious people, and they said, all right, can you do a couple of minutes of just deep breathing? Just kind of try not to focus too much on any one thing, let your thoughts flow, versus allow yourself to do whatever it was. And then they took 2 groups and they kind of did this research, where the point of that research was to see if people who had never done this exercise of stillness, if they would be able to. And really what the thread to this research was that they said, would pain be a reason for them not to do it? So what do I mean? We are such habituated beings. We grow up and there are certain patterns that we ingrain into ourselves, and it's very hard to break out of these patterns. And so this research, what they did is they said, well, we'll give a little shock to people who are not practicing this deep breathing. We'll just give them a little shock and we'll see if they're going to start practicing the breathing. I mean, they knew they were going to do this and they opted in for it, right? Believe it or not, there were 70% of people who decided they weren't going to do the deep breaths because they were so used to being in the busy mind and being in the monkey mind that they'd rather take the shocks. And it really blew my mind because it made me think how deeply ingrained certain patterns can be. And sometimes, even if we know something is good for us, which I'm sure all of us have tried different things in new habit forming, even if we know some things are good for us, we may not do it, even if that means it's going to hurt us. And so it's important to create the sense of awareness of what is possible for us. And I think the sense of understanding that if we have helpful brain and heart states, like if our brain and heart help us be a better person, we can actually get beyond our analytical mind. We can better decision make and navigate the unknown. We can create deeper relationships. We can live more in the present moment. We can experience, this, right, by actually practicing it. And we know that experience outweighs theory any day. So the way I think of it is, our purpose in life really is ever evolving. And the only way we can ground ourselves in the present moment to figure out what step we need to take next is to find things that will help us be present. And so I want to share with you a couple more slides on people that I started research over the last 10 years, because I was deeply curious of, how people actually got past 100 years of age and how did they manage to keep their well-being, optimal? How were they smiling and they were able to storytell at the age of 105 and just be so content with life, even if their lives were simple compared to people living in cosmopolitan cities, right? And so the study of blue zones deeply intrigued me, and I started to look at little villages in Italy and Japan, and I'm sure if you've been interested in longevity in general, you've probably come across blue zones and the concept of it. And these are areas where people tend to live more fulfilling lives, and they get past 100 years. And these are the areas that have the highest population of centurions, as they call them. And one of the models of framework that they tried to map onto people who lived in blue zones was the Ikigai model. And the Ikigai model is really the model to help you start to map out what purpose could be to you. What is your reason for being? How do you want to show up in the world? And so they started to ask these wonderful human beings who had passed the 100 mark on what it is that they were doing. And I think one of the things that they found was that it's simplicity. It's living in the moment in the best way you possibly can and grounding yourself and finding meaning. And so the Ikigai framework just has 4 components, and I'll drop this in the chat, and you can play with it if you haven't already. But it asks you, what do you love to do in the world? What would you like to contribute to the world? What do you believe the world needs? What could you get paid for, right? And what do you think you're good at? And there's a quote that comes from this that I like to leave people with, which is, don't ask what the world needs from you. Ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is for more people to come alive. Oftentimes we try and find answers, from the outside, and actually all those answers live within us on truly what we want to do. And it's not one thing. It doesn't have to be one thing. I think the word purpose can be quite daunting. You could have multiple reasons for being. We're all multifaceted human beings. And I think it's important for us to be able to understand ourselves well enough to really be able to sit in this space of well-being. And so I want to leave you with one quote, and we can wrap up this presentation. By doing the work of discovering your essence, purpose, or your truth, you give this world the most important contribution in your lifetime, an example of living an inspired, meaningful life. And oh, what a ripple effect that energy can have on humanity. So start within, extend it within your homes, and then all else into community, into the nation, and across the globe. Use your heart to guide you, your mind to process, your body to act, and your energy to catalyze. I hope that has helped you, and I would love to maybe take some questions, and maybe we have a couple of minutes for breakout rooms. All right, let's take a look at some of these. Oh, we've got some great suggestions for books over here. Okay. Jabin says, you described this individual and collective journey so accurately. Pandemic life sure did accelerate our pain to self-discovery and a search for meaning. Time to really figure out where to apply our energy and effort to maximize human well-being. Absolutely. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, Lisa has a question. How can we break up our patterns for good? Oh, that's a beautiful question. It's very difficult indeed. And I think it's almost like you can look at it as though a car going over a speed hump, right? Like initially you need to exert this pressure because you're so used to being a certain way and doing certain things that until you actually get over that hump, you're going to feel resistance to the change. You're going to feel like, no, I don't really want to do this. Is this really good for me? And And then you get to a point which is that deceiving point where you know it's good for you, you know it, but your body just won't do it. It's like you're pushing yourself to do it. And really the word for that is consistency. You need to be able to create consistency. And I realized that the one thing that has helped people I've coached create consistency is having an accountability buddy, having someone you tell, have them check in on you, have them keep you accountable for making that change. And it could even be your kids. It could be someone in your house, right? It could be your best friend, whoever it is. That is one way of doing it. But consistency is something that will get you over the hump eventually. And then once that happens, that becomes, written in your neural pathways. It's literally like you're writing new code into your brain. And until your body recognizes that this is the way you want to be, truly, that you truly want to be this way, it's not going to do it as a pattern. Like right now, we would never think twice of brushing our teeth in the night, right? Like I hope everyone on this call brushes their teeth in the night, right? Like you'll take those 2 minutes because you've just been doing it since you were a kid. It's the same thing. It's like you get past that. And it usually, they say it takes anywhere from 60 days to 90 days. But I think things that tend to help push you and get you there faster is just by having someone remind you, and just by having someone nudge you a little bit. And sometimes we need help. We need help from a friend, and it's okay. It's okay. All right. Eric has a book he's put in here, Atomic Habits. I'm pretty sure some of you have heard of that. It's a great book. All right. We'll have to wrap up the session in 2 minutes. All right. I think we've got 2 minutes. We're all in this room. Does anyone want to share a little thought? Yep. It's good to see you here. Does anyone want to share a little thought about how they felt about the program, and just to close on a few lines or a few sentences on their experience here? It would be great to hear some voices from community.
If I can go.
Absolutely, Mac.
What I learned here is that we were taught that we need trust to live outside of us. And with this trustlessness environment that we're helping to build, makes us able to get outside of us. It's too scary to get into this unknown state of being outside without needing trust. But it's wonderful to see the possibilities that we have to create together now. So thank you very much. And congratulations for the presentations today.
Thank you so much, Mac. All right, we have 1 minute. Olga, go for it.
Yeah, hi. If someone just asks me why I'm always so positive, I really say you can implement a lot, but what I really would do is to meditate. And it is so incredible that you exactly today in our last session do not overwhelm us with another technology stuff, but just give us this lesson. It's great.
So glad you enjoyed that, Olga. Mac. All right. Yep. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining this cohort of unit masters. And I hope you will still take the time to review your learnings from the 6 weeks, fill out the request your certificate of completion form so that we can give you the certificate for being part of the program, and hope to welcome you back in 2 weeks as study group leads. So we are looking for volunteers who help host the weekly sessions for participants to meet, and would love to see some of you back and contribute to the program as a study group lead contributor. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Nice to meet you all.
Great meeting you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
No breakup groups. Come on. Last one. Don't leave me alone, unit team. I'm here with this passport that nobody wants. What are we gonna do? Thank you, Hannah. It was great.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, everyone.